Audio.
I just set the hardest route of my life without all of these supporting factors. What happens when I dial those in?
Hey y'all, welcome back to The Struggle. It is me, Ryan Devlin. I am your host, and you are my listener, and you are awesome. I hope you're having a great day. Wherever it is you are in this world, I've got a lot of listeners from all over the world. So whatever season it is for you as a climber, or whether you're training or out there rocking it out, I hope you're having an awesome, awesome day. And I'm really, really excited that you have tuned into this conversation today with Jonathan Hörst. John is an absolute crusher. I've known him for a long time, so you probably recognize by the name Hörst. He is of the Hörst family, the Hörst dynasty, if you will, in the climbing world. Legendary coach Eric Hörst is his dad, Lisa Hörst is his mom, and Cameron Hörst is his brother. They're all wonderful people and crushers, and people I've been very grateful to have gotten to know very closely over the years here, as we have cabins that are near one another at the Red River Gorge, and we've just done a lot of hanging out and climbing. But John is somebody that's been on my radar for like well over a year now to talk to, because I just really respond to his work ethic, his drive as someone who is very analytical with his training, and now somebody who is specializing in nutrition. He has completed his undergrad and is now going into grad school to become a sports dietitian. And so we dive into so much stuff in this conversation, y'all. I cannot wait for you to hear it, from the training chapter to nutrition, tactics, mental game, and beyond. John brings an incredible level of insight well beyond his 22, 23 years. And that's because he's been climbing for about 20 of those 23 years. And it really shows in this conversation. I'll give you a little bit of background here on the phenom, John Hörst, and then we cover so much in the conversation. I won't belabor it on this intro, but probably worth noting, because he's so humble, he won't toot his own horn. This guy has been crushing for such a long time, it's kind of mind-boggling. So you all have probably been following along with my road to 13. I clicked my first 13A at the young age of 45 years old. John sent his first 14A at the age of 10. And I think if my research is correct, I think at the time that he did that, it's a route at the Red called God's Own Stone, I think he was the youngest person ever to climb 514A. If he wasn't, he was certainly one of the youngest. And so 10 years old, he climbed his first 514, and he hasn't looked back since then. In fact, just before we talked, he climbed his first 9A, so his first 514D. And what I think is just maybe equally as exciting and impressive is that John hasn't been singularly focused. We talk a lot about his younger years and how he played football. And again, with the humility, he didn't toot his own horn, but I think they won a couple championships when he was in high school. He was a hell of a football player. And as a climber, he's really diversified himself. He talks about how he wants to become the decathlete of climbing and really excel and become elite in all of these different styles, which I really respond to, because I like to climb a lot of different styles. Working on climbing my first V8 right now, obviously still pushing myself on the sports side, but then I'm really, really interested in multi-pitch, big wall, and trad climbing as well. So anyway, whatever style you're climbing, whether you're in the gym or you're outside on a variety of different types of rock and objectives, John brings a touch of all of it to this conversation. He's got something for you in here. Stick around. It is so, so good. All right, now just a quick second to tell you about my weekend and a couple things I've got coming up, and then we will dive into this fantastic conversation. But if you were following me on Instagram, you saw that myself and a great crew of local crushers and wonderful human beings came over to help me build my kilter board this weekend. Oh my gosh, you guys, it's getting real. It's getting exciting. Well, at the time of recording this, the board isn't fully operational yet. We built the wall together, and it's a really creative, unique engineering feat of magic, if I do say so myself, where we've hinged it at the top so that, because I've got lower ceilings, as the wall gets steeper, it doesn't get smaller, like the area underneath doesn't get smaller. The bottom rises up, and I get more room to climb or to put a pad. And so anyway, we've built it so that it can go from 35 degrees to 60 degrees. It is a thing of beauty. I'm so excited. Shout out to the guys that came over. You know who you are. Thank you so much for helping with that. A lot of creative problem solving. A lot of brain calories were used when we were building this adjustable, very uniquely adjustable wall. And then in the coming days here, I'm going to get the panels up, get the holds up, and I will have my kilter full ride, fully functional and ready to climb on. And I am so excited. So stay tuned 2 Instas for that. And I'm putting together a YouTube video on how we exactly did this build because it's really creative. And if you've got lower ceilings and you want to put an adjustable board in, I think this could be a good solution for you. So that happened. I also got out to the red and second goed a really cool 12A and then 5 hung a really cool 11B. I'll probably do some posts on that. But anyway, it was cooler temps here, like unseasonably cool temps, but very, very manky. It was really humid and I was kind of sliming off of everything, but just went out and had a good time. And I'm just trying to kind of balance it all right now, indoors and outdoors. I hope you are as well. And then speaking of outdoors, I am heading to Squamish. The Mecca. I'm heading to Squamish in just a few weeks here for the Arc'teryx Academy. If you're going to be out there, look me up. Let's hang out. Going to be doing some bouldering, single pitch climbing, multi-pitch climbing, partying. I'm shooting a couple videos, one with Jordan Cannon and one with Amity Warm. Holy smokes. I cannot wait to get out to Squamish. So I think there are still maybe a couple slots left for some clinics for the Arc'teryx Academy there and tickets to the event. The party is epic. I mean, I've been wanting to get out here for this event for years now, and I'm finally making it happen. So, hey, if you've got a chance to get out there, come on out, say hi to me in Squamish in just a couple of weeks. It's what is it, August like 21st through 24th or something like that? You guys go online, figure it out. Squamish, Arc'teryx Academy. And now let's just get rolling. I'm so excited for this conversation. It's a nutrient-dense look into training, nutrition, and everything beyond with Jonathan Hörst. You know, it's always fun when I get to talk to people that I know because, like, I've spent time with you and climbed with you and you've bolted routes next to me while I was flailing on my project at the dark side. And, of course, I've been following your journey for years now and being friends with the family. So it's fun that now I kind of just, like, get to crack open your head and talk about more nerdy climbing stuff than you know, just kind of like the hanging out that we've done. And there's a lot, man, dude. You got a lot going on. I mean, I'm catching you right now at the tail end of Wild Iris, and you just sent your first 9A, your first 14D. So huge congrats on that.
Yeah, dude, appreciate it. It's been a wild ride, and you know, I appreciate the flight to get on the interview. And like you're saying, it's good to know each other beyond just the conventional like social media side of things that a lot of climbers interact with. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
Well, good. There's no shortage of things that we can dive into here, but I'm going to enter into this conversation as I like to do on the struggle through the lens of struggle. And you've been climbing your whole life, John. I mean, when did you start climbing?
Yeah, this is always a funny topic. I'm not sure how to describe when I started climbing. You could say it was when I did my first lead, which was at age 7, or maybe it was first top rope at age 4 or 5, or go back to the age of 2 when I was, just the kid that wanted to be like my dad, bouldering around on the home wall. So, where you draw that line, it's kind of up to you, but yeah, it's pretty much been my whole life exposed to climbing.
Yeah, no doubt. Like as long as you can remember, essentially. And how old are you now?
I turned 23 next month, so starting to feel kind of old. But
no,
I'm thinking back to the high school days, and even back in college, and it's crazy how that time's flown already.
Well, let's just say then you've been climbing for 20 years. You're 23. We'll say we'll put a start at 3 years old. And so anyway, you've been climbing your whole life. And so it's interesting. The perspective that you have on climbing is very different from me. I started climbing when I was 30. You're not even 30 yet, And so we all come to the sport at different times, but you've had this very unique situation where climbing has been an important part of your life, not an exclusively important part of your life. And we'll probably dig into this because you've done other sports and of course have many other interests, plus school, creatively and professionally and all sorts of things. But climbing has been a part of your life for this time. And so your relationship with climbing has, I'm sure, evolved just as you as a human have evolved over the last 23 years. But when I ask you what struggle means to you or what your relationship with struggle has been with climbing, what comes to mind?
I think you hit it right on the head that, my access and approach to climbing has been quite different than a lot of people. But to me, struggle is kind of the essence of climbing to me, right? It's not about trying to pursue, the hardest climbing grade or like get whatever tick you want to get and post about on social media, but being out there and having to fight in such a personalized way, just you against the rock, is such a special thing to happen in climbing that you can't really find in many other sports, and have been able to dedicate a lot of my life to that and grow up in that scene has been pretty awesome.
As a high performing climber who's also part of a climbing family, who's also just trying to be like a kid who's growing up, like what, can you reflect on that a little bit? Like, what's that experience like?
I mean, to say it's not been a roller coaster would be a lie, right? As an adult now that understands things a lot better than when I was a kid, I'm definitely in a different spot. It's definitely unique how I got into climbing, especially growing up in the East in a climbing family, but also a family that was trying to emphasize, not being a full-time climber as a kid, not having climbing feel like a duty or a job or something that, you'd burn out from, like some kids that grew up out West have. So, growing up as a kid, not being able to climb as much as I wanted to was actually a pretty tough thing, because I was this psyched, 10, 11-year-old, and all I wanted to do was climb. But my parents had to, make sure we were, staying focused on other stuff and not getting burnt out. And through high school, when, especially when I was playing other sports like football, I was taking a lot of time off climbing most of the entire falls, and not have access to that for part of the year was tough. And then getting back into it, I was super psyched. So that allowed me to be where I'm at now as a 22-year-old, still like on fire to climb, where I feel like some other kids might not have had that blessing growing up as a full-time climber.
Yeah, I do think that's an important kind of distinction that you make there. And of course, I know this just having had conversations with your mom and dad. And of course, your dad is Coach Eric Hörst, who's just been a huge contributor and force within the climbing world for decades now. Your mom, a heck of an athlete, like scratch golfer and golf coach, and then also a climber as well. So climbing in that family, you mentioned your brother too, Cam, who's an incredibly strong climber. And I'm sure his story will come in here at times as well. And he's been on the show. So you've had climbing in your life this whole time. And from maybe a less known outside point of view, you might think like, oh, all they do, for the last 20 years, all they've done is eat, sleep, and drink climbing. But you grew up with, like, it sounds like a very kind of well-rounded sport childhood. If you just focused on climbing, do you think you'd be somewhere else? Or do you feel the well-roundedness in the other sports and all of that, in fact, have helped you to become a better climber?
Maybe I'd be a little bit better of a climber, but my past, I wouldn't change a thing about it. There's so much great that climbing offers, especially to developing a kid as a younger child or a teenager. But there's also so much that climbing can't really offer that a kid of that age needs, So being in a team sport like football, you get stuff, the grit out of that, and the team building and the focused schedule of like playing sports on a weekly basis and having to train so specifically under a coach, and also just being a kid, not feeling like you have to perform at your absolute best when you're a 14-year-old, and having that in my life was huge to developing as both a person and a climber. And I think if all I had done was climb, then, maybe I'd have climbed a few letter grades harder throughout my childhood, but that doesn't really mean anything. And the benefits I got from, my high school friends and growing up in a place without a lot of climbing have contributed to make me the person I am in a way that I don't think climbing could have done, despite all the greatness. And then on the flip side, being able to be out in nature and go to Wyoming for a month in the summer as a child without, cell coverage and with your family and camping and being exposed to nature, that's something that I think every child needs as well. So for sure, climbing has had a profound impact on me as a developing child, but those other things beyond climbing had just as great of an impact, and I wouldn't change a thing.
And did you ever do comp stuff? Were you a comp kid at all, or was it mostly outdoor climbing?
I would definitely say I am not a comp kid. 100% not a comp kid. There are some local regional comps at like a Philly gym or whatever that maybe I do once a year, but fall is the comp season, fall and winter. And as a kid, I was psyched on football at that time of year. So, I was doing football games on weekends or team practices that I couldn't skip out on. So pretty much most of the fall comp season, I wasn't available to compete. And then when I was climbing, I was psyched to be outside and trying to send projects outside and be with my family. So the comp thing never really seeped its way into my life. And, I'm pretty happy, pretty content about that.
Yeah, well, no doubt you would have competed at a high level had you, but it sounds like the psych was more on the outdoor side of things, which is understandable because you've been able to travel around and go on all of these fantastic adventures. Let's bring things current here. So you've graduated undergrad and are you about to enter grad school? Is that where you're at?
Yeah. So I graduated not this past May, but the May before, May 2024. And I took the past year off to kind of get psyched and find my way in climbing. But I'm starting back up in a master's program at the University of Utah in a month. So that'll be a change.
Yeah, and tell me a little bit about, just give us like the overview. What did you focus on in undergrad and what's the plan for grad school?
So, I was full in the science. In my undergrad, I majored in biochemistry and I got a minor in nutrition. And now for the grad school thing, I'm going for a master's program to be a sports dietitian. The U's got a great program for that. So, I'm kind of psyched to have this really strong base of science through my undergrad and then be able to apply it to a more focused, human perspective in the sports nutrition side of things and, apply it to myself and then use that to, apply it and help other climbers. So that's the plan for the next few years.
Yes, dude. I'm psyched. Well, congratulations on that and also good luck because it sounds like you've got quite a bit more challenging schooling ahead of you. But considering the major and the minor that you just finished up in undergrad, I think you're going to be doing just fine. And so much of that can apply to this conversation that we're about to have here and certainly to your future and your career. Let's turn our sights to training right now and geek out a little bit about training. And I'm sure we could do an entire podcast just on training, as you are the son of a legendary coach and have probably experienced all kinds of training ups and downs throughout your 20 years of being a climber here and, many more years to come. Let's enter into it where we typically do, though, through struggle. And so this is something that's just been a part of your life, your whole life. Is there anything about training that you struggle with? What comes to mind?
Oh, 100%, dude. Of course I struggle with training. Yeah, I mean, on the basic side of things, obviously it was an amazing opportunity growing up with my dad in the house. Any training question we had, boom, my dad's right there to answer it to the best of, any climber's ability. And thankfully, my dad did a good job of not being too coachy but also being enough of a coach. But, through a lot of my childhood, the approach to training wasn't as hardcore as you might imagine. There was definitely a training regime we had, but, it wasn't like a focused hardcore training program like you might get from another coach. We were training as a family and super psyched, but, we weren't trying to be pushed too hard into that. And then especially in college, man, when I went to Penn State, dude, that was a struggle. The gym there was good for what it was, but, compared to what's out there in Salt Lake, it wasn't much, not having, a system board and a community there of stronger climbers made it really tough to, want to go there twice a day and prep up for a 2-day weekend, 8 hours away at the Red, and having to train alone for 4 years and, not have access to all the facilities I wanted. That made it pretty tough. And it was quite the struggle to fight through that and, leave college a stronger climber than I went in. That was quite a fight.
There was a climbing gym at your school. It just wasn't, it was pretty basic.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's like the campus gym, which is kind of more fun and games, not much going on, but there was a proper climbing gym like 10 minutes away. And, it had everything you needed. It was a good gym, but it was built for the community. It wasn't built to train and support high-end climbers. So right. I was able to go in there and thankfully with my knowledge and my access to family, like make do with what was there. But, not climbing on a system board for 4 years when, that's kind of the easiest way to strength nowadays was pretty tough. But, I made it work.
Yeah, well, you definitely made it work. And I imagine you're being quite humble, but I'm reading through the lines here, which is essentially that I'm sure that all of the set problems were pretty chill for you to be able to take on. They weren't setting V12s, I doubt, at the local gym there. No. Every now and then they'd set a V10 or so, but most of my time was just spent on the spray wall, trying to do my own thing. And everyone laughed at me because I'm on the spray wall over here doing 6-minute circuits while like they didn't, usually understand what that was for. But, I kind of spent my time and did the dirty work that I had to do, although it wasn't the most fun training process in my life. But, at the end of the day, it wasn't the greatest gym, but I also made a ton of friends there and was able to get what I needed done there. And, I was able to perform well at the Red and stuff like that. So, it was a good experience, but I'm definitely looking forward to being in Salt Lake, where I've got amazing gym after amazing gym,
and stronger climber after stronger climber. So, that I'm hoping I can use to level up.
Oh yeah, the facilities there are so mega. Well, let's look back a little bit over the years here, because as you mentioned, you've got a family of climbers, strong climbers. You got your brother who's a heck of a climber, and now a coach. Your dad, of course, and your mom there the whole time. And you mentioned system board training and spray wall training and getting stronger, or it sounded like also running circuits on those and getting prepared for like a weekend at the Red. As you look back on the various different kind of self-experiments that you've done on your training, are there a couple things that stand out that you felt kind of were the best bang for the buck in terms of time and the results that you got?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. So I like to think that my training approach has been kind of unique, in that because of the sporadic access I've had to climbing, both as a kid, but also distanced from good rock climbing in college, I never would really train focused blocks of climbing, like a strength power block or an endurance block or anything like that. I was always simultaneously focusing on both, trying to equally allocate time to both and hopefully gain them. But there was never a focused block on either one, just because my climbing a distance away was, on weekends or such like that. I didn't have a lot of options to go focus on a goal. And having that approach to climbing, I thought that I would level up both my strength and my endurance pretty quickly and linearly together, but realizing that having all of this emphasis on both at the same time kind of limited how much each of those could gain on their own. So it worked as a kid and what I needed it to in my climbing back east. But I think having a really focused training protocol where you can have a goal in mind and know what you're trying to deliberately focus on and deliberately get a gain in, it's definitely better than just kind of doing everything and hoping everything gets better. And then more specifically, growing up, we had a tread wall in the house, which I don't see a lot of the time. And my dad said this to you before, but I'm convinced the tread wall is like amazing to be able to control your protocols on there and be able to train endurance for as long as you want, or power endurance for as short as you want, and control that for yourself. That's something you can't do on the ropes at the gym or on a spray wall. You have such control over the variables, and having, a tread wall in our house growing up was amazing for training endurance, especially since we were usually psyched on the Red. But, now going back out west, I think I'm going to shift to more of a system board focus and try to really hone in on, those core moves and shouldery crimp moves and all that stuff that, can only really be achieved on hard set boulders. And I think that's got a lot of utilization in climbing.
I'd love to explore both of those for a second. First, on the tread wall side, I'm super psyched because I found a tread wall on Marketplace that I picked up just recently.
Yeah.
And so it's in pieces in my garage, but at some point soon here, I'm going to get that thing set up. And yeah, I'm curious. I mean, first of all, as a kid, having one of those, because my kids are so psyched, because it's almost like it's like a video game. I mean, the thing moves and you can pick what holds you on. It's really rad. And so I know my kids are going to be playing around on it a lot. And I'm sure for you, it was just like a lot of fun. As a kid, you could go down and, like you said, you didn't need to worry about somebody belaying you or somebody waiting in line. And so you can really just go as hard or as long as you want. And, I'm predominantly a Red River Gorge climber as well. So we can kind of look at this through my lens. Do you have some advice for an almost tread wall user myself here pretty soon?
Yeah. So on our tread wall at home, it was a fixed angle. So we actually didn't have it changing too much. And,
Right.
I think a fixed angle was just fine. But I think for the Red, the one thing I realized, and I started doing this, a few years ago when I was trying to train for Southern Smoke, which was I was deliberately training my ability to rest on the tread wall, right? It's really easy to just get on the tread wall and like be psyched and climb a bunch and get super pumped. But that's not actually giving you the focused improvements that you actually should be looking for. So what I was doing was, as part of my larger like aerobic training on the tread wall, I would have, a few sets where they would be long sets, but I would, climb for 2 minutes pretty hard and then fully rest for a minute on the wall. And I don't think enough climbers deliberately train the ability to rest. A lot of the time you'll get to a jug and not be able to recover. That's the purpose of a jug. You get to there and you recover as much as you can for the next red point crux of the route or whatever it is. And if you can train your ability to grab that jug and recover 10%, 20% better than you could in the past, well, then your goals are just always going to be better. So yeah, I would build in these structures where I'm getting pumped and I'm doing hard boulders and hard moves on the treadmill as part of a long set, but then also finding a good jug and resting on that deliberately to try to train that ability in my body to get the heart rate down, get focus, recover. And, that's a very cellular adaptation that happens. It's not like just getting better endurance means you're also going to be a great rester. You look at all the pro climbers, they can get to a jug and get fully recovered, and send another V14 on their project afterwards. Whereas climbers that just kind of go out there and don't do too much focused training, they get to a jug totally blasted and are barely able to recover and then fall bolt after the jug. So I think that's something you can use the treadwall for, to specifically focus on and get huge gains.
Really, really like that. And for those who don't have a tread wall, if you've got a spray wall similar, you could do your circuit, but then rather than hop off, grab a jug, get into a position and try that. So you would just like stop the tread wall. Like you would climb for a certain amount of minutes and then get the jug and then just like hit the stop button, essentially rest until you felt like you were ready. And then you would start back up again.
Yeah, exactly. I'd get to a jug and I hit the stop and, I'd make sure it wasn't like a full handlebar. Like I want it to be something realistic, a good jug, but something you'd find on a route. Not where you can just like rest on your palms. There are some of those, but generally, you're hanging on. So yeah, I'd get some good feet, get into a good position and like shake out, use a chalk bag, just like I was on a route. And I think it's important what you said for the people that don't have a treadwall. You don't need a treadwall. I spent 4 years at Penn State without a treadwall and I was doing this on the spray wall. I do my circles. It was, kind of monotonous, but I'd get, to where I want and I'd find a jug and I'd sit there for a minute and I'd repeat.
I love that. Okay, so kind of the other side of the coin here on the endurance, of course, is training pure power and strength. And you mentioned system board training there. You're out at Wild Iris right now, which for me, where I was recently, it was definitely a wake up call. They call it bouldering on a rope for a reason, and it was definitely a different experience than being at the Red River Gorge. But fortunately, I've been spending a lot of time on system boards recently. I've got a kilter that in the process of setting up, which is great, but also getting to the gym and getting on some friends' boards. And you've been using that quite a bit, as you noted. So how are you using system boards in your routine? And then maybe we can talk about some of the ancillary things. Are you doing other like dedicated finger training, hangboarding, campus boarding, weightlifting, cardio? How does kind of off the wall training fit in? But we can start with maybe the system board and then parlay into the other stuff.
Yeah, the system board's a great invention. Being able to focus on communally set really hard routes on a wall that's not going to change, I think is a great thing for climbers. To be able to isolate like a certain hold sequence or a shouldery sequence or something that emphasizes your core more, to be able to hone in on those precise aspects of your climbing and then do it for a few really hard moves is exactly what you need to do to train hard. Obviously there's these other parts of your body that need to be focused and trained, but being able to sesh hard boulders on a system wall where you can return to a hard project time after time, or you can, take the communally created routes and just build volume on these hard climbs is a much easier way to build strength and power and, even power endurance to apply that outdoors, whether it's a boulder or you're even on a sport climb. You look since the spray walls have become a thing in the past, 4, 5, 6 years, a really big thing. I feel like the number of V14 climbers in the world has skyrocketed because you give them a TB2 and a kilter board and that's all they train on. And then for what that is, they become insane. So, I think that it's definitely an amazing tool to utilize, but it's also important not to just spend all your time on those things because, you're not building any endurance on that. You're going to get 2 bolts up and around and be totally blasted, even though you're a V14 climber because you've never done more than 6 moves.
Right. Yeah, unless you're Michaela. I had a conversation with her and she was saying when she was training for La Rambla, she was doing like 50 move circuits on a system board, but not many of us can train endurance on a 40-degree board.
This is true. And also it's kind of tough to find, 5 minutes in the gym on a system board when, the crew of 5 people behind you is not trying to send their project.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, cool. So, big fan of that myself as well. And I think a point well made there, where you want to have that balance in there, especially if you're a route climber. If you're exclusively a boulderer, then maybe you can get away with just training on a system board and getting some moderate capacity just from doing some volume days on a system board. For the rest of us who like to do routes, it's good to have that balance. And then what about beyond that? It is interesting because you're an elite performing climber, but also for the majority of your life, you've been a weekend warrior. As you noted, it's an 8-hour drive to get down to the red. You guys are in Pennsylvania. There's maybe a couple, smaller local crags around there that your dad helped to develop. But essentially, you're doing a lot of training and then coming in for a weekend for a strike mission to perform, and then you were going back. So, maybe 5 days a week, you weren't out on rock. And when you aren't climbing on the tread wall or on a system board or a spray wall, what else are you doing that you feel has contributed the best to your climbing fitness?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like outside of the system board and the tread wall, like a hang board is a proven tool. I think being able to use that intelligently and not get injured and also spend all your time there is really important. Unless you're, the Alex Megos or the Yannick or whatever of climbing where you've already got the strongest fingers possible. I think there's a lot to be done with a hang board. And then, like you mentioned, the whole cardio thing, as a really endurance-y sport climber at the red, I found that the cardio gains of being a better runner and having a stronger heart, going overboard's too much, but having a stronger heart and being able to get your heart rate down and pump more blood through your body totally helps you on a route. When you're on a rest or you're climbing on a route and you're getting super out of breath, well, if your heart's stronger, you can get more blood to your muscles. Well, then you're just going to climb better and longer. So I found that putting in some rest day running and in some of my cases, I went a little overboard. I got a little psyched on running in a little bit of a stint, but I think doing a short, zone 2 running or some sort of cardio, whether it's a bike or swimming or whatever it is, can totally help you for the sport climbing stuff. Thinking about lifting, I back in high school did so much lifting trying to be strong and muscular for football. But now, I've got this huge frame and I put on muscle really easily. If I even look at a weight, I'm going to bulk up. So I try to stay away from that. Maybe down the road, I'll get on it. But, I do focus shoulder rehab and stuff like that. But otherwise, I'm not hitting bench press and deadlift anymore. Though I think for some people, it could be a useful thing to build muscle and antagonist strength.
Right. Yeah. You built such a foundation through the organized sports that you were in that it's clear when just looking at you that you probably don't need a whole lot of additional conditioning done. But the running is interesting because, and it's maybe, more specific to like the red or longer sport climbing areas, like some of them that you would find in France or in Spain, because there's kind of this old adage. I ran into Steve Bechtel when I was out at Iris, and he's got that famous saying that running is as good for your climbing as climbing is for your running. But maybe there's an asterisk to be had for those longer sport routes, where it's not just 4 bolts, but it's 15 bolts if you're talking about the Madness Cave or like the area of the venue that you've developed out here. And we can talk more about that in a bit. But essentially, having that generalized cardio, one could go over Stoker on it. I know you did a marathon not too long ago, which maybe was, I don't know what your experience was on that. I did a half marathon and it almost broke me. But how often are you running or kind of what's your general protocol?
Yeah, so during the marathon training, that was its own thing. I went overboard, got psyched, wanted to run a marathon, but I'm not going to get too into that. But, in my climbing focus, I'll just do like a nice, chill rest day run. I'm more fit as a runner since doing my marathon. So maybe for me, that'll be 5 or 6 miles. But, going out and doing a low heart rate 3-mile run 2-3 days a week, that's not enough to fatigue you for climbing or take away from the strength gains you're trying to get. If you go really hard into running, maybe that'll fatigue you for your climbing workouts, or maybe, that'll build too much fatigue and minimize your other gains in climbing. But just kind of having a focus to strengthen your aerobic system in general, your cardiovascular system in general, I found helps me. I mean, when I was at the Red, Alex and I would go on a run, on a rest day. We'd go do 3 miles around the Cliffview cabin area and, not get out of breath, not get too tired. It'd be a nice wake-up call, get some blood flowing, and I thought it was great. So I think the application of it may not be the most visible, but I think it's there. And if you're trying to do these long puppy routes, it can definitely help.
I recall seeing you and Alex run by my cabin on occasion last fall, and it was like pissing rain, and you guys are just out there running around the neighborhood. And I was just, sipping my hot cocoa thinking, well, I guess this is why I'm not an elite climber, but I appreciated you guys doing it. There's also a lot of hills in that neighborhood. So good on you guys.
That was more of the German psych. Usually if it's raining and stuff like that, I'll stay indoors. But Alex was really psyched in it. So we went out, put some rain jackets on, and got wet.
This episode is supported by Rungni. Y'all know Rungni. It's Magnus Mitbo's company. Oh my gosh, they make incredible stuff, you guys, okay? Chalk, apparel, accessories, chalk bags, chalk buckets. It's all there over on their website. What are my favorites? Okay, well, right now, I'm using their liquid chalk every time I go out and have a session. It's called Mag Juice, first of all. So boom, you've already got my money. But then, it works really, really well. I rub it on my palms, my fingers, and it's like my base layer. I don't then have to chalk up as much when I'm climbing, whether it's a gym session or out at the crag. Less time chalking up means more time actually climbing and hopefully landing moves and not punting off my project. And then the apparel's fantastic. My absolute favorite, I think you guys know this, are their harness pants. They are stretchy, they are durable, they are attractive. I love the cut, I love the feel. They are the best dang pants in the game. And right now, you can get 10% off pretty much everything over at Rungni by using code STRUGGLE. I'm really hyped to share that one of the sponsors of today's episode here is Arc'teryx and their insanely cool Climb Academy, which they're putting on in British Columbia again now for its 17th year up in Squamish. I've chatted with Arc'teryx athletes Jonathan Hörst, Amity Warm, and Jordan Cannon about this event, and it sounds like pretty much the coolest experience you can get. I'm hoping to get out there myself for it because I really want to get back to my granite climbing roots, and I would love to see you all there. But you know what? We're all going to have to act fast here because no doubt it is going to sell out quickly like it always does. Here's what you get at the Climb Academy. It's an epic 3-day event geared towards all skill levels, and it includes clinics taught by top athletes, film premieres, live music, and just some of the most pristine granite the world has to offer. Man, Arc'teryx just knows how to do it right. The Climb Academy runs from August 23rd to the 25th out in beautiful Squamish, BC. And to view the clinic lineup and grab a spot, swing by the struggleclimbing.com/Climb Academy, or just hit that link right there in your notes. The clinics go on sale May 9th. Let's go. I hope to see you there. This episode's brought to you by Arc'teryx and their incredibly cool Climb Academy, which is back now for its 17th year this summer out in Squamish, British Columbia. Y'all, I have chatted with Arc'teryx athletes here on the show. You know them, Jonathan Hörst, Amity Warm, and Jordan Cannon. And it sounds like this event is one of the coolest things you can attend in all of climbing. I am hoping to get out there myself for it. I would love to see you there, but we are going to have to move fast because no doubt this thing's going to sell out quickly like it always does. So what is this Climb Academy experience? Well, it's an epic 3-day event geared towards all skill levels, and it includes clinics taught by top athletes, boom, worth the price of admission right there, film premieres, live music, and you just get to go play all day on some of the most pristine granite the world has to offer. The Climb Academy runs from August 23rd to the 25th out in beautiful Squamish, BC. Cannot think of a cooler place to go. To view the entire clinic lineup and grab a spot, you can swing over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/Climb Academy, or just hit that link right there in your notes. I want to shift now and talk about nutrition, which is an area of special interest for you and also a growing area of expertise for you. So lots to unpack in the nutrition chapter. I've also been on the receiving end of some of the delicious things that you've cooked up out at the family cabin there. But what about struggle? Anything in the nutrition area that's been a struggle for you?
Yeah, big time. I mean, one of my struggles is, man, I just love to cook amazing things, So I'll find recipes and I'll get psyched and go really overboard on those. And sometimes they're not the most nutritious or sometimes they're maybe not the most beneficial for my climbing. And, I've tried to stray away from those now, but yeah, I just love to cook and I love good meals. So especially over a point at college I think I went a little overboard on that and put on some weight, and it was a little counter to my climbing. And I think there's a point where we can dial in our nutrition and find where our body's at to be, in its most optimal condition to perform. And if you go under that body weight or that body composition, well, then you're going to be completely fatigued and not have the energy. And if you go above that, then maybe there's a little too much there that you could do without. So I had the struggle where I was trying to find where I wanted to be to be the best built climber I could be. And like I said earlier, I put on muscle so easily. If I get a little too into the strength stuff or, have these really high protein stints, I can just bulk up. And, in general, that might be good. But for a climber, having a lot of excess muscle isn't the best thing. So, and that's the whole food side of things. Then on the nutrition side of things, that's a totally different game. Learning to dial in the micronutrient and the nutrient, things I'm consuming relative to when I'm climbing and when I'm training, that's been big. I kind of experimented on that through college and found that when you can deliberately apply your nutrition to your climbing, and beyond supplements even, just like what your meals are and how you time those can be extremely impactful to your climbing and your red point burns and all of that. So this experimentation I've done with myself and just finding what works for me has totally leveled up my climbing and my training and my energy availability. And I think prior to that, I'd feel like, why am I out of energy for this workout? Or why was this second go worse than my first go when I should be more warmed up now? And, realizing that maybe what I was eating at the crag or what I was eating before the gym or when I was eating it was not what it should have been to be optimal for climbing condition.
This is so great. I'm excited to just unpack all of that because we've got somebody A, who's psyched, and B, who's experimented and now experienced in all of these areas. So okay, we're gonna go through, I think, a lot of the things you just touched on. One of the first of which, though, you mentioned kind of these experimenting with these fluctuations on essentially what is kind of the set weight, if you will, that makes you feel fueled and ready and primed to climb hard, but isn't excess. And you had kind of, when you just recently sent your first 14D with mutation, and kind of a bit of a wink in the caption of the post that you made was like this little rhetorical question that you posed, heaviest 9A send ever ? And I don't know if that's true or not. To look at you in the post, it doesn't look like you're carrying much excess body fat, but to your point, it may be, a lot of muscle that you've got on there that isn't being applied to your climbing. In any case, you just climbed your hardest grade. Yeah. I don't know whether you felt you were heavy or not. It was kind of an interesting hypothetical question that you posed there. But what have you learned about yourself over the years with regard to that kind of working weight that seems good? And do you explore times where you're building and times where you're cutting for various objectives or seasons?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to preface this kind of a touchy subject in climbing, but I think there's definitely a discussion to be had. Some people can go overboard and take it too far, and then you're hurting your health and you're hurting your longevity, and absolutely that is bad for your health. But then, trying to perform at your best, like body weight and body composition, can be a factor. I think the one thing I've realized over the past year where I've climbed more than I ever have is, depending on the objective, everything changes. So I went through a large trad climbing, big wall stint. And for that, you're just requiring so much out of your body. You're not executing at the highest strength and power level possible. So I was willing to sacrifice some of that through training and what I was eating and all that to just have more energy and more capacity on these massive missions. But then when you think about some sport climbing and you're cragging and you're trying to send your project, like that is an instance where over the past few months, I was cutting down from this big wall, more mission weight and trying to get to a more performance body weight where most of what I have on me is contributing to my send. So whether that's too much muscle or too much fat, I try to find that perfect zone of where it's the best for my climbing, where it's not too little, not too much, but it works. And, you need a lot of time to figure that out. And I referenced the heaviest 9A send in my comment. Part of that is just, I'm 6'3". There's not a lot of climbers I could think of, especially at a high level, that are above 6'0" or 6'1". So, you start putting on these height numbers, and part of that just comes with adding bulk. So carrying, in my case, 185 or whatever it was, up a 100-foot route, that's pretty impactful move after move. And that's not to say that it was in a bad way, but it's just, the nature of climbing. And
right.
perhaps when I set my 9A, still from the big wall stint and a lot of the route developing I've done where performance wasn't the focus, maybe I do have some optimization to do on my body. But yeah, I think finding how it works for you and finding that perfect zone for yourself is more critical than just hitting some arbitrary number that another climber has.
Yeah, you might have to give Kai Leitner a call and see what he was at when he did Life of Villains and Death of Villains. You guys can duke it out, because I think he's 6'3" or somewhere in that neighborhood as
Something
well.
like that. Yeah, we're pretty similar there. Kai and I are. I don't know a ton of climbers that are trying to climb at that level at our height.
Well, it's really cool to see how you guys are doing it, and I think, to your point, what may be even more impactful, if you're within a relatively healthy zone of kind of body composition and body weight, what maybe is more impactful, as you alluded to at the top of this chapter here, was kind of nutrient timing and the macronutrient makeup. I know you did a stint where you were wearing a continuous glucose monitor, and this is your area of interest and expertise. So let's uncork this a little bit. We can talk about you specifically, but then maybe even broaden it out to those who are listening and anything that you might have learned with regard to that. Because for me, I'm still very much in the dark here. I mean, I try to eat well. I try to supplement to backfill areas where maybe my normal diet isn't. But like on a crag day, I don't know. I mean, it might be a rushed morning with the kids, and all I have is a yogurt, and then I've got like a handful of nerd gummies at the crag. And, I haven't been scientific enough to know, I sent my project on this day. Let me see like what I did on that day. Like, I don't know, life is just too hectic. So let me kick it over to you, figure out what you've learned in this department. And then if there's any kind of generalizations that we might be able to carry on for those who are listening.
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing is climbing, gym training, and strengths coaching and all of this is always the focus in climbing, right? Because you need to be stronger to be a better climber. But just as important in that is the nutrition side of things, which I don't think is really tapped into in climbing. The personalized side of, optimizing your nutrition and what works for you to set yourself up best for a workout or an outdoor session. So for me, that was a lot of trial and error, and generally for everyone it is. And, finding what I ate before a training session, or what I ate before Red Point Go, or in the morning or at night before a long day, and experimenting and changing those things up and realizing what works for me was a huge help. So you mentioned the glucose monitor, and I thought that was really fascinating because there's this zone of blood glucose to be in that is best for performance, right? The availability of blood glucose for your muscles, not being too high that you're going to crash mid-route, and not being too low that you don't have enough energy, but finding that level and being to put yourself in that level during a session or during a Red Point Go, more importantly, can be critical to how you feel. So for me, the one thing that I find, and I stand by this for me, is a banana 30 minutes before the go is money, right? I eat that, and when I was using the blood glucose sensor, I'd eat that banana 30 minutes before, get in that zone, and I'd feel great on the route. In past years, it was funny. I had this thing that would happen to me, and it would be at the end of a day, and maybe I'd run out of food in my pack, and I'd get this really unique fatigue, and I didn't really understand what was going on at the time. But now I realized I just was energy deficient of that day. I finished my crag food, and I'm 10 pitches deep trying a route, and now I've just got this weird pump that I can't recover from. And realizing, okay, that's because I didn't eat enough during the climbing day, or eat enough carbohydrates before my go, or even the night before. And now on my go, I'm feeling it. And having that recognition and proprioception to know what's going on and try to change it, I've noticed has really helped my climbing days and even my training sessions as well.
Were you just keeping like a food journal and then writing down anecdotally how you felt before or after a workout? Essentially, how were you kind of tracking this to start to put together what was working and what wasn't?
Maybe this is the science part of me, but I like to be really analytical. So, I was doing this just like you do an experiment, and I was seeing what I ate and how I felt and taking note and making adjustments. And maybe it was I'd eat 10 minutes earlier, 10 minutes later on a Red Point day, or I'd change the nutrient composition of my meal the night before a climbing day. And, depending on how I felt, I record that and kind of keep moving. And now I kind of think I have it dialed in, and I'm lucky, I was educated and I am really interested in this. So I kind of have the wherewithal to make these adjustments for myself. But a lot of climbers just don't have that base level of understanding of such a complex issue of nutrition. So I think that's where the whole nutrition coaching side of thing can come in, be a big game changer for climbers. I'm planning on over, the coming months and years that then I'm going to try to apply this deep nutrition understanding I have and try to help coach climbers just like they get coached for strength training, but on a totally different side that I think a lot of climbers have overlooked.
I would like to explore through your lens what you feel are maybe the most important things for us to be thinking about. Of course, it's all individualized and we need to figure out how to kind of turn these dials each way.
Yeah, so the tough thing is that every influencer on social media has their own trick to what the perfect nutrition plan is.
Right.
And that's what makes this so tough is there's this incoherence of what you should put the importance on. And I think to just strip that back and go to the basics, right? When you're thinking of a sports application of nutrition, focus first on the macronutrients, carbs, fat, protein, and second, and more importantly than a lot of people think, on the micronutrients. So when I'm approaching it in my personal climbing journey, I'm thinking, okay, these macronutrients are the greater source of fuel for my body, right? So I need to construct my meals and what I'm eating so that the availability of nutrients supports what my endeavors are. So for immediate action in climbing, you want to have carbohydrates, the immediate source of fuel. But for longer term efforts in an aerobic effort, like a long sport climb, for example, you're tapping into those fat stores and you're running off of that energy. So having this built up ability of your body to function off of both is big, and constructing your meal so that you have the availability of all these nutrients that you need are important. So performance, energy, I'm thinking carbs first, some fat second. And then for the whole recovery thing and muscle building, protein's absolutely important. And my guess is over half of climbers are protein deficient just because the requirements and muscle breakdown that happen on a long day climbing and all the hiking and hard training is really hard to restore through just a normal diet unless you're eating a lot of meat. That's where I think a protein supplement can be totally huge, because being protein deficient, and I've noticed this with myself, you cannot gain from the workouts as well as you would like, and you can't have the stamina day after day when you're just broken down and beaten when you're not recovering without that protein. So the macronutrient side of things is what I focus on first. But then more importantly than a lot of people think is the micronutrients, right? So that the B vitamins and the minerals, like I mentioned, and these are the smaller kind of behind the scenes sources of fuel in our body. All of these complex biochemical mechanisms that happen rely on these micronutrients as intermediates and cofactors and structures in these processes. And if you're not getting enough, niacin, B3, then all of these intermediates, these NADH and these complicated things are not present. And therefore you cannot complete these biochemical processes to the efficiency that you want. So getting a good micronutrient dense diet can be totally profound in how you feel and have a lot more energy, which seems counterintuitive because they're not actually providing calories and a tangible source of energy, but the way that they are incorporated into these processes is, arguably just as important as the greater macronutrient part of things. So that means getting a diet that's got a lot of fruit, a lot of natural whole grains, these things that aren't stripped away due to processing. The processing of foods, especially in the American diet, strips away a lot of these key micronutrients that provide energy. So getting a less processed diet is kind of the source of those.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's interesting. I've had a lot of conversations on this show and off this show with people who know quite a bit about this kind of thing. And that emphasis hasn't been highlighted as much. Usually there's, a heavy emphasis on things like protein and all important things on the macro side, like you've said. But on that micro side, for those of us who aren't getting a huge amount of fresh vegetables or fruits or whole foods, if we don't have a super strong whole food diet, can those be delivered via supplements, vitamins, that kind of thing? Or is it just much better to be coming in along with the fiber or whatever else you would be getting with the whole foods?
Yeah, 100%. And I turn to that myself. If you have the perfect diet and you've got all the money in the world and all the time, then, you don't need those supplements. But realistically, very few people are actually achieving that or able to achieve that, right? So that's when the supplement game comes in. You know that there are these things, like we just talked about, that are required for efficient and optimal body functioning. And if you simply can't get them in your diet, for whatever reason that is, then you turn to a supplement and you take that from the outside, and it works just as good as getting it from your diet. I always say, like, from the purest point of view, yes, fix your diet first, try to optimize your diet and get that to work. But realistically, life gets in the way. You don't have time to cook all these things or buy, the most luscious ingredients, and then turning to a protein supplement or turning to a hormone support supplement or all of these things to supply these vital nutrients that you aren't getting from your diet is absolutely a good idea, especially when you're trying to perform at your best. Finding a good supplement and, using it consistently when you need to can totally be a game changer.
This episode is supported by PhysiVantage Nutrition, and I've been using PhysiVantage since long before there was ever even a podcast. I've been a paying customer for many years now. It tastes the best, and it does the best for me and supporting my goals in my training, my recovery, and my performance as a rock climber. I'm sure you all are familiar with their products. Their athlete team is crazy, from Alex Magos to Jonathan Segrist, Amity Worm to Daniel Woods, and so many other crushers out there are using PhysiVantage regularly. And that's because it works. I use their supercharged collagen every day before I train my fingers or I go climbing. I use their vegan PowerPlex protein, which tastes incredible. The chocolate flavored protein that PhysiVantage makes is just crazy. That's like my sweet treat that I have at the end of every day. I'll either mix it up with some water or milk, or I'll mix a scoop in with my plain Greek yogurt, and it tastes like chocolate pudding. It is so good. And then recently, because I've been trying to build up that endurance for my long, pumpy climbs out here at the Red, I've been using a lot of their Sendurex, which is like a beetroot extract. It's highly concentrated. It is science-backed to help support the endurance system. And I'm feeling like I'm climbing longer and harder and also recovering faster when I'm using PhysiVantage products. So I think you're going to love it too. If you haven't tried it, you can get 15% off your order over at PhysiVantage.com using code STRUGGLE15. If you're looking to level up your training, your recovery, and your performance, I have really felt the difference using this stuff for the past few years. And I think you will too. Check it all out at PhysiVantage.com and use code STRUGGLE15 to get that discount. Let's shift and talk about tactics now and also technique. I think we can kind of pull into this chapter as well. And I think this is going to be an interesting one as well because you, as you alluded to earlier, you've gone through these phases recently where you've done some big wall kind of more alpine objectives, and you're in Iris right now, but you're a Red River Gorge climber. And it really seems like you've built out the toolkit a lot in your style of climbing. And I want to explore that also just tactically speaking in terms of send goes and conditions and anything else that you feel is a difference maker beyond just like your fitness or your physical preparedness. So I'd love to explore all of those things, any number of those things, but let's talk about struggle first. Any struggles on the tactics side for you?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest struggle is that I grew up and spent all of my time before this year pretty much as a sport climber. And then as I transitioned into the psych of doing these other things, big walls, alpine stuff, a lot of trad missions, I thought that I'd have a much smoother transition to those. And I got pretty beat down for the start of those objectives. I realized that being a really strong sport climber and strong in the gym doesn't actually mean that much when you're like 2,000 feet up on a pretty hard splitter. So that kind of got my butt kicked. And I worked through that. And now I like to think I'm pretty competent. But man, there was this struggle of trying to find my way in these new endeavors of climbing, having this background of pretty high level success that I've had. And that introduction and getting smacked down pretty quick was quite the struggle.
Yeah, there's a lot of tactics when it comes to big walls in particular. And I've had multiple conversations with Jordan Cannon on this show and others who specialize in that, Tommy and Honnold and that. But for somebody like yourself, where you brought, I'm assuming, a very high level of strength and ability to these climbs, you're not probably hitting many limit moves, but there's so much that comes into play with efficiency and systems and hauling and placing of gear and all of that. So what has that learning curve been like for you?
Yeah, like you alluded to, I don't think in my 4 or 5 month big wall trad climbing in the past year, I don't think there was one time where I was physically, like strength wise, at my limit, right? Because you're not, or at least I'm not at that time climbing on 14 plus level routes like that. I'm not recruiting that level of strength and power, but there's all of this other stuff that contributes to it. These long days, these 12, 14, 16 hour days on the wall where you're expending so much energy on, like you said, hauling or just kind of the general fatigue of being up there and in the sun and doing all of this, climbing with heavy rack on and all of this. and then this 16-mile approach or whatever it is to get to some alpine mission. Right. All of this contributes to the fatigue that you don't get as a sport climber doing a 20-minute approach and then doing a 10-minute go and resting for an hour and 10-minute go and resting. So there was definitely this exposure to the elements of each style that took a lot of getting used to.
And what about the style of, if we're talking about like valley climbing, for instance, which is just notoriously sandbagged, and you know, you get on an 11A slab and it might be frickin' stopper for somebody who hasn't been out there and isn't used to the glassy feet or the jams, or to your point, the exposure and the head game that comes in with that. Did you find your time on that style of climbing has translated over to like your time at Wild Iris or elsewhere, or are they fairly siloed?
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking vertical valley granite to Wild Iris, I don't think there's a ton of overlap. I definitely had my period of needing to learn that technique. Being a good granite vert climber is its complete technique on its own, and that took a lot of adjusting, but I think the essence of that doesn't exactly translate to like climbing 50-degree overhung like auto routes. But, you know, it's funny, when I was taking my limestone skill to there was, you know, a lot of adjustments that needed to happen. But just recently I had a friend from the Valley come over here and climb, and his amazing granite tech was translating the somewhat sloppy technique on the limestone. So I wouldn't say that the actual technique translates much, but the head game and the efficiency and all of that is just a good skill to training climbing in general. So I definitely got some benefits from it.
Now that you've done a good amount of that, obviously you've focused more predominantly on hard sport climbing, but you had a crash course in big wall climbing. What are you psyched on?
I mean, there's a lot of individual things I'm psyched on, but more in general, you know, I'm trying to build myself. It is kind of what I've been thinking of, like the decathlete of climbing in a sense, you know, trying to perform at a really high level in multiple different avenues. You know, there's some people that take the focus of just trying to be the absolute best in one realm. And that was me for a lot of my life. But now I'm thinking, you know, if I can be a 9A plus climber and do things like free El Cap and climb 514 on gear and 513 or whatever hard in the Alpine, and, you know, get into some hard bouldering strength, all of this together as like a cumulative approach to climbing is kind of what I'm psyched on. So I have all these individual goals for each style, but just more in general, I'm trying to build myself to try to be elite at each of these levels. And, you know, nowadays I don't feel like there's a ton of that in climbing, especially among people my age. So, you know, I'm trying to stay focused and diversify my time in all of these different avenues, and, you know, hopefully it works out.
Hell yeah. I love that. It also just sounds like a lot of fun because you get to travel the world and experience so many different landscapes and people. And, you know, Babsy and Jacopo come to mind. Maybe Connor Herson, you know.
Absolutely, Connor.
Yeah, the younger generation there. But you're right. Not there tends to be seems to be a trend towards specialization, and I've always fancied myself a jack of all trades, master of none. And so I always get psyched about just trying to do lots of different things. You mentioned bouldering there, and obviously you do quite a bit of bouldering in the gym to prepare for outdoor objectives. Yeah. Do you boulder on rock often?
Yeah, so the answer is no. This is a funny story of me. I like to joke with my friends. I could count the amount of boulders I've done in my life on two hands. You know, I did one trip in 2021 with some friends my age, and maybe did, you know, 5 to 10 boulders, and didn't really try too hard. But just where I've grown up and where I went to college, like, sure, there was actually pretty solid bouldering in Pennsylvania, but I was stoked on sport climbing, and I had so limited time to perform that when I was available to climb, I was going out to sport crags. And as a child in the summer, I was going out to sport crags. So, you know, now being in Utah where the climbing is much more accessible for bouldering, I think I'm psyched to try to do a stint and try to check that out more. But, you know, up through now, no, dude. I think the hardest boulders of my life have been on sport climbs.
Yeah, well, and those are hard. So, what was that? Well, Chris Kosser was catching you on something. It was like 5 monos in a row or something that you were doing out just recently.
Yeah, I think it's 5 or 6, depending on how you climb it. But yeah, that was pretty legit.
Yeah, those are hard boulders. But speaking of Chris and Nathaniel, I saw was out there, and in this crew, there's There's definitely a crew of boulderers that I imagine are going to be like peer pressuring you to get out on some blocks here as soon as you spend more time with them.
Yeah, definitely the peer pressure is a thing. And, just for like the sake of being a better climber, like being able to perform hard on boulders, will help my sport climbing. And as part of my, decathlete approach, I think being a hard boulderer, is up there with the importance of all the other styles. So
no doubt.
Time will tell how that works out.
And you can also just find some like really long, isn't like Grand Illusion like 20 some moves or something? Like you just got to find the long boulders.
Yeah. I mean, obviously that's unbelievably hard and beyond what I could fathom now. But I think boulders like that is probably how I imagine trying to boulder at the highest end if I get there.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, let's talk about tactics kind of on the sport side, where you've been spending a lot of time as well, and just what you've learned over the years and the different areas you've been with regard to conditions or preparation or warm-ups or skincare, or, just looking back kind of what do you feel are the difference makers for you on the days where you send versus the days where you don't?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two big determinants of how I'm going to perform on a day. And one is how fresh am I? I don't think enough sport climbers rest enough. They go on their 2-week trip or whatever, and they climb like 6-7 days in a row and take one day off because they want to maximize their days, which is great for having a good time, but it's not great for sending your hardest. So if I'm really trying to send my best, I'll get it prepped and ready to go. And then the 2 days off is key. Finding that rest period before you go is just a game changer to be able to operate at the highest level. And the other thing is a really good warm-up. Here at Wild Irons is a little more unique because of how tweaky it is. But I mean, I spend 30 to 60 minutes just on the ground on a hangboard, kind of pulling around, stretching everything, getting warmed up, maybe bouldering around on the wall before I get in anything. And at the red, that's less time on the ground, but more time doing a gradual warm-up where working goes in the project to warm up. And I don't think enough climbers do that either. They just kind of get to the crag and they session their project and wonder why they don't feel great right out of the car. And it's like, well, dude, because like you're trying to climb your hardest and you haven't done anything to warm up. So the being rested and the being warmed up, I think are two of the biggest players. You mentioned conditions. That's also important. I don't ever like to really rely back on conditions or use them as excuses because you can't control those and everyone's got to deal with them. But conditions are a thing. You're trying to climb at your highest level and you're greasing out of a hold because of humidity. Like that's just not going to work. You're losing energy that should be given to the send on conditions. So when I think back to the 9A I just did, I took my 2 days off. And then I came back on the first day of climbing expecting to send. The conditions weren't great. And honestly, I still felt kind of powered out. I did my full warm-up process and said, I'm going to come back tomorrow. I came back the next day. The conditions were worse. It was 80% humidity. And I was like, man, I just committed 3 days to doing this. I can't waste another day. Warmed up again, gave it a go, and fell at the end. It was so humid I was greasing off, and I said, I'm going to come back tomorrow. So I cut these 2 climbing days short, anticipating to save myself, hoping for good conditions. And then on that third day, the conditions were absolute money. It was 60 degrees, super windy, low humidity. And I said, first go. And, had I not thought the long game and relied on conditions and felt how my body was, then I would have just flailed on it for a day or two and then been stuck in this revolving door of not sending. So being able to dial that game and know how you feel and take advantage of what you have is critical for climbing hard.
Yeah, it's a really mature perspective to have. And it takes a lot of discipline, I think, to do what you did, because oftentimes you show up and you're like, well, look, now's my time, I'm going to go. And some people that is it, like, well, okay, I got the day off work today, I got to do it. And that's fine. Mm-hmm. But you had the option to wait and, you were able to have that self-discipline to be able to do it. I also liked that each day you did the full warm-up kind of as part of checking in with yourself. And I'd love to peel back on the warm-up a little bit there and understand a little bit more on kind of what you feel works best for you and where you feel your best attempt then comes.
Yeah, so I like to standardize my warm-up when I'm doing a trip in a crag and realize, okay, this is what I want to get done, and on a good day, this is how I feel. And then based on that kind of standardized warm-up, if I don't feel the best after, well, then I know, maybe I'm not trying my absolute hardest today or doing as many goes. And if I feel really good, well, then I know that it's a money day. So that's kind of the whole warm-up side of things.
Then once that warm-up happens for you, let's say you might have a few attempts. Like when do you think your best attempt is?
Yeah, so this I think really depends on the route. At the red, generally, my second go is always better. I do my warm up and then I'll either bolt to boulder or I'll just try it. And sometimes I'll send, but if I don't, after a good rest, I feel like that first go has primed me for a better second go. And at the red, I found that that's the case. In more powerful areas too, I find that works because you can do all the warm up you want, but the route specific warm up is key. So I always find that after you've given one go on the route, I think the second go is usually better because you're specifically warmed up. Now there's some instances where that doesn't really apply, that maybe doing a go and it might ruin your skin or it might zap you so much because it's got one really tweaky hold or crimp that you want to dedicate your first go to. But generally, I think that the second go after I've got that route specific warm up is usually better.
Well, this is a great segue into the mental game chapter here, because we're talking about kind of understanding where we're at. And oftentimes for me, mentally, it does help to do a go on the route, whether it's a bolt to bolt or an actual go, because I can kind of, I don't know, get some of the jitters out or I just refamiliarize myself with the route if I haven't been on it in a little while. Lots to unpack here as well, because you've recently done big wall climbing, trad climbing, and mental game comes into play quite a bit there as well, as it does for just a high-performing athlete like you are, with various send pressures and just the pressures of being an elite athlete. So any number of areas we can explore. Let's start through the lens of struggle, and either looking back historically on something that has been like a mindset struggle for you that maybe you've tackled or overcome, but it was a big thing for you, or maybe something current. What comes to mind?
I'm thinking in the past, I described the whole school struggle, and that was, its own thing. But more currently, I have a really, really good example of the mental struggle. So following this long stint of big wall climbing and alpine climbing, I wasn't in the gym much. And then kind of the spring came, and again, I got a few weeks of training in, but then I went straight to the red and got psyched on developing and did all that for almost 2 months. But all of this meant it was almost 6 months where there wasn't a lot of high performance sport climbing, and there really wasn't much gym training at all. So coming into this summer, I was having a really tough mental struggle about where I stood as a climber. I was thinking that because I haven't trained and because I haven't hard sport climbed a bunch, there's no way I could climb well. And that kind of took a toll on me. And thankfully, my partners and my brother and my family were really good at helping me fight that. But kind of the start of my trip, I wasn't the most confident in how I'd perform. In fact, if you would have asked me in the end of April, I would have said this summer was probably a wash. And it was not in a negative way, because I loved what I did and I loved what I was doing those past 6 months. But I just figured, there's years in the past where I had fully dedicated myself to sport, and this was not that year. But having to fight that mental game and then realize what my mind was saying was probably wrong, and that the numbers on the wall and what I was sending and, my tick list kind of said its own thing. So fighting that mental battle of what I thought versus what was reality was really tough. And then ultimately I got over that hump. And when I was trying this 9A, the first few days of getting back onto it, got really psyched. And I said to people at the house, I was like, I'm going to send today, which is completely crazy. Because like I said a month ago, I didn't think I stood a chance. So that was quite the struggle for sure.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think those of us who are listening have gone through, probably I certainly have, and many people who are listening have probably experienced something similar, where we just don't believe in ourselves for whatever reason. And you somehow made that turn happen, because it sounds like you didn't, paradoxically, it didn't have a benefit for you where you like alleviated send pressure. Sometimes you'll go in with zero expectation because you're like, there's no way I'm going to send today. The conditions are bad. I didn't sleep well last night, and I forgot my favorite shoes. And then because there's no expectation to send, all of a sudden the mental, weight is released and boom, surprise send. It doesn't sound like that was the case on this. It sounds like you came in with a little less confidence in yourself, but you got to a point where you were like, hey, I'm sending today. Like you felt that confidence in that stoke, which also is like releasing a weight. And can you connect the dots? Do you know where that shift happened or how it happened?
If I had to guess, I'd say it was two things. One, it was that before getting on the hard project, I was kind of climbing at this adjacent area, and I just performed really well there, better than years in the past. And that was kind of supporting evidence to say, wait a minute, like maybe what your mind's telling you is going on isn't reality. And the second thing was just having a good crew of people, good friends, good belayers, a good team to like keep you psyched and keep you positive was really big. You know, help them bounce back at you when you start getting down was super helpful. And, you know, I like to think of this as now I'm even more optimistic, right? Because everything I just said to you about how I didn't think I was fit for it. I mean, there is some truth to that. I hadn't trained and I hadn't done a lot of high performance climbing. So I'm telling myself now, wait a minute, I just set the hardest route of my life without all of these supporting factors. What happens when I dial those in? You know, and I get to go train and I get to spend some more time high performance climbing and I dial in my body composition and all of these things. I'm pretty optimistic that means, you know, I'll have even more in the tank to keep going.
Yes, dude. What a cool feeling. Hell yeah. Sky's the limit. And I recall sending you a message to that extent. Essentially, if you're not stronger, then you're just better. Like you just got better at climbing,
right?
You know?
I think this is true.
And that's freaking rad. Well, I love that. Thanks for expanding on that a bit. And it definitely helps to have that good supportive crew. And you mentioned going out and sending some things that weren't the project. And I wonder how much that comes into play, because sometimes I get into tunnel vision if I've got a project and it's just like, okay, every trip out is going to that thing. And it can be a bit of a feedback loop. Sometimes it can be good, but sometimes like in reflecting on my work on the force, like maybe it would have done me better to go out and have like some side objectives. And how conscious do you think about like hard performing red point days versus maybe more maintenance days or fun days or on-site days and how you break up like a season?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, just like kind of you said yourself, put too much emphasis on projecting. You look at the best climbers in the world and yeah, all they're doing is projecting from what you see, but they're doing a lot of supporting climbing. And also like, that's their job. Like what they do is send the hardest routes in the world. So trying to make your own program off of what the highest end people do is really not the best move. And because I didn't have the most access to climbing, I like to think that I kind of honed in this approach to this good intersection between projecting and kind of mileage sustaining climbing. And the way I like to do it now is I'll do day one fresh, kind of working the project, getting psyched, dialing that in. And then day two, I'll find something else, a side project, a few letters easier. Maybe that second day is some on-site climbing or some easier climbing, or maybe it's just finding another easier project that maybe will take me a handful of goes instead of a dozen. And then once the send time goes, okay, hone in on the project. But until you're there and you're ready to give efforts clipping the anchors, like don't only climb on that. You know, not only is it going to take away from your climbing fitness in general, but it's going to take away from your psyche if all you're doing is falling. You know, sending some sub-maximal stuff is pretty fun. So is projecting, but sending other stuff is nice as well. And it makes you a better climber, it keeps you psyched, and it kind of gets you away from the project. So I like to mix in a bit of both.
Yeah, no doubt. It just feels good to get to the top of stuff. So it's more of a do as I say or do as you say, not as I do, because I sometimes get sucked into the thing. But I am
Me
more
too.
and more.
I mean, everyone does.
Yeah, exactly. Like when the psych is high, it's just fun to go out and even bolt to bolt. But there's a lot of value to, you said, to on-siting. I mean, there's just different skills and different mental strengths that we can develop by doing that. And if it's not clear to the listener by now, and I think it probably is abundantly clear, the thoughtfulness that you have around your climbing and the work ethic as well is just absolute elite level. And I wonder if you've done much reflecting on that. Like where does the drive and the work ethic and the stoke and the clarity come from? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And to be honest, I don't think I could precisely pinpoint it. But, you know, there's a few things I would say. And the first thing is just growing up in a very intelligent climbing family with a really supportive structure was really helpful to that, right? You know, knowing that you're not alone in this battle of just projecting, how benign that sounds, like it's a process, you know, the mental game of climbing, and having people to support you on that's really big. And, you know, having climbed for so much, I've had a lot of time to kind of reflect on my climbing. But I'd say the third thing was over the past few years, I've gotten like really more into my faith as a Christian. And I think that's really helped me as a climber and kind of realizing what's important, where to put focus in life, and kind of relying back when I'm tough on myself. And having that with me has really helped me kind of have a more mature and clear approach to climbing.
maybe this ties into a little bit as we kind of wrap up the mental game chapter there, what tools you use or how you manage any sort of fears or anxieties or things when you're actually like on a route or tying in for a route if it's a sport route, or as you've said, you've done some big wall climbing. And it's a common question that I get from a lot of listeners, which is just like, oh, hey, when I'm climbing for some people it might be a scary boulder that's got a weird top out. For some people it might be just a few moves above a bolt on a sport route, and for some it could be a rated R, trad route. You've probably got experience with all of those things. And so how do you manage those fears or anxieties when they pop up?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. The first thing I'll say is I'm 22, so I've got a lot to learn in this, but I think it's important to know what your objective is, right? If you're going up on something, like in my experiences in alpine climbing or sketchy trad climbing or whatever it is, like if there's real legitimate like danger, and maybe it's not very dangerous, but there's inherent risk to trad climbing. I have a much different approach in that than when I'm on a climb in sport climbing, because you got to recognize the position you're in and what can happen. So, if we think sport climbing, it's quite safe, right? You're tied in, you've got good bolts. Generally, you're not going to ground and stuff like that. So the greater side of the mental game in sport climbing for me is staying composed while you're on a route. And I've noticed this more so when it's a route with rests. If it's a 90-second go where you're climbing really hard for 90 seconds, I don't even recognize that I'm climbing until I put the anchors. Right. But when you're on a long climb and you've got rest and you're there for a minute or two and, now you're battling in your mind, am I too pumped to do this? Do I feel good? Do I know my beta? All of this. Am I focused enough? And being able to just kind of dial in and focus where you're at in the moment is important. And, I've come to realize that I think when I was younger, I put too much emphasis on climbing. And at the moment, it felt like it was the most important thing in my life. And now I've kind of realized like the rock's not going anywhere. If I fall, there's always going to be another go. And even if it's at the end of the trip, like, yeah, it's a bummer, but you can come back. This isn't the most important thing in your life. There's other things to put emphasis on, and this is just your personal achievement. So for me, I have this killer instinct and I absolutely want to send. And if I don't send, I'm bummed. But on the climb and after I fall, just knowing that there's more profound things to put my eyes on and to stay focused in this climbing journey, and also just the journey as a human being, is kind of what's helped me in my pursuit of climbing.
Beautiful. Thank you, John. I appreciate you sharing that perspective. There's one thing we didn't touch on that I do want to explore with you, because you've been doing a lot of it, and it's a bit of a behind the scenes unsung hero side of climbing, and that's developing. And you posted a video not too long ago, just an insane, one of the coolest pull back shots in all of climbing I've ever seen of you at this place at the Red called The Venue. And I mean, it just looked absolutely mega. I've, spent some time talking with you about it and your dad about it as well, but there's just a lot coming online here at the Red, but you've also developed around elsewhere. And it seems to be an area of climbing that you really like, and it takes a lot of work. And so just tell me about like developing in general for those of us who are listening that tend, like myself, to just be able to walk up to a route that's cleaned and has nice bolts and we just get to climb on it. We often don't think about what goes into it. And also it seems like there's a lot to be excited about in the world of developing right now.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up. I've gotten really psyched on developing over the past few years. And then this whole Red River Gorge thing kind of fell into my lap. And I feel like the route developers in climbing are kind of like the unsung heroes of it in a sense. They equip everything and it works out. And a lot of people don't give that recognition. But nowadays, and especially for people my age, route developing is kind of a lost art. You go to the crags and they're mainly established, and, you want to send your hard routes and not spend the time, on a static line bolting. But I've grown to really love that process. And to be on a wall alone and kind of pioneering your own path and being the first person up this is really awesome. So this opportunity at the Red was great because, I had known about this crag prior to the land purchase, but then once it happened, it was like finally real and I could put it into action. And, as far as crags are in the country, I'd say the Venue is probably the top 5, like most epic in what it is when you walk in there and see it. And I just feel really blessed that I got the opportunity to develop it. There was an OG guy there, John Weaver, who kind of found it and started the process. But since the land acquisition this spring, and my dad and some other friends were the only people to tap into this. And it felt like just a kid in a candy store to be able to have this unbelievable cave and just tap into it and say, there's a line, there's a line, there's a line, and, pioneer these new routes. And moving forward, I'm really psyched to do more of it. I think that although it is kind of a lost art, I think there's a lot of rock to be bolted in the country, although it's pretty hard to find nowadays. But it's such a rewarding process, and being able to give back to the community in that sense after climbing on these routes for all my life is a pretty special thing to be able to do.
Well, thank you for doing it. I doubt there's much going to be at the venue that I will ever be able to tie in for, but
dude, there is, oh, yeah? There is for sure.
It's so cool. I can't wait to check some of that stuff out. And for those who are listening, yeah, there's a lot of routes coming online at the Red after this recent land acquisition with the help of Ian and the RRGCC, the coalition, and all those parties that came together to open up access for hundreds, maybe many hundreds of new routes that are coming out here at the Red. So if you already thought there were too many routes to climb at the Red, there's about to be double that. So it's a little overwhelming. There's too much out here, John.
Yeah, I think there'll be many hundreds, like you said. I think we're talking 400 or 500. I put up 30 myself, and I think among the other friends, we've probably gotten 50, 60, maybe upwards of 100, and there's way more than that to go in. So it'll be pretty sick.
Insane. So sick, dude. Well, thank you for doing that. And I'm really excited for where you're at, not just as a climber, obviously, just climbing 9A and doing your hardest stuff right now, but also what you've got coming up in grad school and how you're going to be able to contribute back to the climbing community with a focus on nutrition as a dietitian. It's all really exciting, man. Good luck with all of it. I can't wait to see you. If you're coming back this fall, then I'll see you at the Red. Yeah,
dude. Definitely trying to come back this fall. Try to check off some of the projects I haven't yet sent. And I appreciate, the support, and I'm looking forward to how things play out.
All right, that wraps things up with the incredibly thoughtful and cool Jonathan Hörst. Keep an eye on this guy. Lots of potential and lots of exciting things in the future for him as a climber, as well as a dietitian, a developer, somebody who is just psyched and going to be giving back and making a positive impact on this sport for many, many years, decades to come. John, thank you for taking the time. I'll see you soon. And if you want to hear more from Jonathan Hörst, you can check out the bonus episode, which is out right now. Let me tell you what we cover in this bonus episode, because it's really, really good. He talks about his #1 training protocol that takes 6 minutes, how to stay in shape when time is tight, getting beat by his dad on front levers. Gotta love that. Shout out to us old guys. What makes up a good quote-unquote rest day, climbing and living with Alex Magos and what he's learned from one of the best ever. And I thought that was really interesting, actually. Some surprising tidbits that you wouldn't think when you hear the name Alex Magos. And then lastly, he shares his most memorable day of climbing from this past year. And it's maybe not what you would think. It wasn't what I would have thought. You can get instant access to all of that right now at zero cost, actually, with a free trial over at patreon.com/thestruggleclimbing-show, or right there in your Apple Podcast player if you are an iPhone person. And you're also going to get instant access to more than 100 hours of other bonus content featuring the best of the best. I'm talking about Adam Ondra, Chris Sharma, Nina Williams, Alex Honnold, Magnus Mitbo, and so many more athletes and coaches that have been on the show here. Plus, pro clinics on stronger fingers with Dr. Tyler Nelson, advanced bouldering with Allison Vest, moonboard with Ravioli Biceps, performance hacks with Hazel Finley, and so many more. It's all there for just a few bucks a month, or actually zero cost right now with that free trial, so you can try it before you buy it. Although, honestly, your support as patrons and subscribers is really what helps to keep this thing going. So if you got a few bucks, I certainly would appreciate your help as I'm jamming away here in the podcast/utility closet. Thank you. I love you. Big thanks and appreciation to all of our show sponsors who have brought you this episode here at zero cost. Way to go. You can check your show notes for links and special discounts from those guys that are only available to Struggle listeners, and there's some great discounts there, so check them all out. Actually, you can see all of the show's brand sponsors and special deals by popping over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/deals. Hey, did you know that The Struggle is carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation? Well, you do now, and it feels pretty good for me to write that check every month. They're doing such amazing work to bring clean energy to communities around the world. Y'all can get inspired and learn more about their amazing work over at honnoldfoundation.org, and toss them some love if you can. They're doing awesome stuff. And lastly, The Struggle is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. The show is produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin, and edited by the wonderful Glenn Walker. All right, that clips the anchors on this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and supporting the show. If you want to do something that helps me out for zero cost, you could rate and review the show wherever you listen, or just share this with one of your climbing friends or the gym that you climb at. It really helps to get the word out there. I appreciate it. I hope your training and climbing are going great, and if you are struggling like me, well, just remember the struggle makes us stronger.